What if the greatest financial machine of the ancient world was never made of metal, never forged in royal foundries, and never stamped with the face of a king, but grew silently from the soil of a rainforest? What if an entire civilization engineered value not through vaults, coins, or treasuries, but through a substance so fragile that it could rot, mold, or disappear with a single season of bad rain? And what if this system, this economic engine, was so sophisticated, so flawlessly constructed, that it powered hundreds of cities, thousands of trade routes, and countless political alliances, until the day it was erased? Not lost, erased. This is the story buried beneath ruins and ash, a story reconstructed from broken murals, scattered bones, burnt codices, and abandoned tools. A story of how the Maya built a hidden financial engine, protected it for centuries, then watched it collapse, not because it failed, but because too many forces tried to control it. Picture the rainforest before cities rose, dense green stretching endlessly, rivers winding like arteries. And scattered across this landscape, small groups of people discovering something unusual, a tree whose seeds, when dried and ground, created a bitter drink used only by chiefs and priests, a drink reserved for rituals, a drink that carried prestige, status, and ceremony. Cacao. But how does a ritual drink become the backbone of an empire-wide economy? To understand that, you need to walk through a Maya city before sunrise. The markets haven't opened yet. The stone streets are quiet. But the moment the sun cracks the horizon, the financial engine wakes up. Farmers walk in with baskets of maize. Hunters carry drying strips of meat. Salt traders arrive from coastal routes. Potters, weavers, toolmakers set up their places. And then, almost on cue, a quiet sound begins filling the air, the soft rustle of cacao beans being poured from pouch to pouch. This sound, more than anything else, is the heartbeat of the Maya money engine. A woman sells a woven cloth. The buyer hands her 20 cacao beans. A fisherman offers freshly salted fish. A merchant counts out 15 beans. A potter receives 30 beans for a decorated jar. No metal, no minted coins, no royal seal. Just beans, carefully dried, carefully stored, carefully guarded. But this is where the engine becomes mysterious, because cacao was not simply currency. It was engineered currency. The Maya didn't just use cacao, they controlled it. They chose specific regions with the perfect balance of shade, humidity, and soil. These became cacao zones, guarded by farmers with specialized cultivation knowledge. They understood that too much rain could ruin a season, too little shade could destroy a crop. Cacao was currency because it demanded skill, precision, and geography. No single city could produce enough to dominate. No king could mint more at will. Nature restricted supply. Knowledge controlled quality. This created a unique economy, one where value wasn't dictated by rulers but by landscape. Now step away from the market. Follow the sound of moving feet, the clatter of goods, the rise of voices. You'll reach the trade routes, long, narrow paths cut through jungle and stone. These aren't just roads. They are channels through which wealth flows. Along them travel the pollum, the long-distance merchants of the Maya world. A pollum isn't just a trader. He is an accountant, a courier, a negotiator, a risk manager, a keeper of secrets. He carries obsidian from highland quarries, jade from sacred rivers, salt from coastal flats, feathers plucked from rare birds of distant forests. He knows which city needs blades, which city has surplus textiles, which kingdom is preparing tribute for a festival and requires cacao in bulk. He also carries something else, information. Routes where bandits have been spotted, cities with weak harvests, kingdoms preparing for war. Prices shifting quietly in markets days apart. These merchants become the unseen nervous system of the Maya economy, transmitting signals, warnings, and opportunities through every journey. But here's the forbidden part. The pollum maintained notebooks. Not the kind we imagine. Paper didn't survive the climate, but small bark sheets, folded, coded, marked with symbols only traders understood. These were price records, inventory codes, route changes. When the Spanish came, they destroyed these records first, believing them to be political documents. They had no idea they were burning financial intelligence. Walk deeper still, into the administrative quarters of a Maya city. You'll find storerooms filled with sacks of maize, bundles of cotton, ceramic vessels sealed with wax, piles of salt bricks. These aren't random. These are tribute goods. Citizens didn't pay with coins. They paid with production. Farmers gave maize. Salt workers gave salt. Hunters contributed dried meat. Cacao farmers paid with beans, sometimes thousands at a time. Each city took in these goods, stored them, redistributed them to laborers building temples, workers maintaining roads, or soldiers preparing for conflict. This wasn't just taxation. It was a controlled redistribution system, an economic engine that kept cities running through equilibrium, not profit. And now we reach the most secret part of the Maya economy. Hidden inside certain temples, usually ones connected to the ruling family, were storage chambers that once held what scholars now call the coded registers. These were not religious texts. They weren't political treaties. They were accounting tablets, painted, carved, or etched into plaster walls. Some recorded tribute totals. Some tracked stored goods. Some listed seasonal expectations for cacao distribution. And some were far more complex, showing rotational cycles of labor payments, agricultural yields, and trade obligations. Most of these chambers were destroyed, not by nature, not by time, but by humans who wanted this information erased. A king losing power destroys the tablets of the king before him. A conquering city wipes out the records of its rival. A priest hides the economic knowledge of his temple from outsiders. Then came the Spanish, who burned anything that looked like a ledger, not realizing they were burning centuries of financial records. But traces remain. A half-erased mural showing rows of cacao bags stacked like treasure. A plaster wall impression listing salt weights delivered during rainy seasons. A broken codex page describing merchant obligations. A temple carving recording the total tribute of a conquered town. Piece by piece, the engine emerges. And now picture the system fully running. Cacao flows from specialists to markets. Goods move along trade routes. Merchants carry intelligence. Tribute cycles fill storerooms. Temples function as administrative centers. Cities specialize and cooperate through a web of shared economic need. This is not a primitive economy. This is not a simple barter world. This is a hidden machine, an engineered financial structure built without metal, without coins, without centralized currency control. But like every engine, it had a pressure point, a point where a small crack could become a fracture could become a fault, and a fault could tear through an entire civilization. The Maya money engine did not break loudly. It didn't fall apart in a single disastrous moment. It cracked slowly, in the smallest places first, where almost no one was looking. The market still opened each morning. The merchants still walked the roads. The cacao bags still moved through hands. But small inconsistencies began weaving into the daily rhythm of the economy, almost invisible at first, like faint tremors before an earthquake. One of the earliest signs appeared not in the bustling cities, but deep inside cacao groves. Farmers began noticing strange patterns, trees flowering later than usual, pods growing smaller, yields fluctuating unpredictably. A single season of low yield was normal, but when low yields became routine, something shifted. Fewer pods meant fewer beans. Fewer beans meant reduced flow of currency, and reduced flow meant tighter markets, hesitant sellers, cautious buyers, and merchants forced to carry more goods and less cacao. But the most dangerous shift happened not in the soil, but in the storerooms of the elite families who controlled the best cacao lands. These families began locking away surplus cacao. Not publicly, not aggressively, quietly. A bag removed here, another stored there, a portion withheld from the market each season. Their private reserves grew, hidden behind stone walls, recorded in ledgers only they could read. And the more they stored, the scarcer cacao became in the open markets. This scarcity created imbalance. In some cities, goods piled up unsold because people held on to their beans, afraid of the months ahead. In others, merchants began accepting partial payments or demanding extra goods to compensate for disappearing cacao. The engine, once smooth and predictable, began to grind. Then came the political tension. As cacao became harder to obtain, rulers demanded greater tribute from the people to maintain ceremonial obligations. But tribute was not a suggestion, it was duty. Families who once contributed a reasonable amount suddenly found themselves expected to deliver impossible quantities. If they failed, their goods could be seized, their land could be taken, their labor demanded. In the outskirts, whispers began. Farmers leaving their fields before dawn to discuss shortages. Traders gathering in shaded corners of markets to question the behavior of merchant elites. And in the long jungle roads, Polam merchants noticed something unsettling. More checkpoints, more inspections, more soldiers watching the movement of goods. Trade routes that had once flowed freely now felt like corridors under surveillance. Some city-states began blocking certain merchants from entering. Others imposed heavy passage obligations, demanding goods or labor before allowing traders to proceed. A few powerful cities began choking the routes deliberately, hoping to starve rival kingdoms of cacao and force political submission. This wasn't economic cooperation anymore. It was economic warfare. The Polam started altering their routes, choosing hidden paths, traveling at night, dividing their cargo into smaller batches to avoid confiscation. But this secrecy came at a price. Merchants could no longer share information freely. Messages that once moved openly between cities now had to be delivered quietly, cautiously, sometimes not delivered at all. And as information slowed, markets darkened. Prices could no longer be predicted. A bag of salt could be valuable in one market, worthless in another. A carved jade ornament could be abundant in one region, completely absent a short distance away. The engine began losing its balance, not because goods vanished, but because knowledge fractured. Deep inside temple administrative chambers, scribes tried to track what was happening. But their records, once precise, grew chaotic. Tribute tallies fluctuated. Seasonal expectations no longer matched reality. Storage chambers that were once full now sat half empty. And in some cities, rulers began erasing older records to hide the decline. If a king could not meet expectations, he destroyed the evidence that proved it. This destruction erased critical economic logs, long-term agricultural cycles, historical yield patterns, merchant route agreements. The system wasn't just failing, it was forgetting itself. On the ground, something even more subtle took place. People began abandoning specific crafts. A potter, who could once count on cacao payment for his jars, now found himself waiting weeks. A feather collector who traveled for days found no buyers. A salt worker watched mountains of his product sit untouched. Economies rely on confidence, and confidence was draining from the foundation upward. Families quietly left their homes, migrating to smaller regions where demands were lower and resources more stable. Fields went untended. Workshops fell silent. Roads that once shook with footsteps turned still. Cities didn't collapse from invasion. They hollowed out from within. The final rupture came from the one thing the Maya could never control: climate. A sequence of extended dry periods struck the heart of cacao zones. Trees that were already weakened began to die. Entire groves browned. Farmers tried shading methods, soil treatments, irrigation attempts, but cacao is sensitive to drought. Once groves decline, they take years to recover, years the Maya economy no longer had. Without enough cacao, the currency river dwindled to a trickle. Trade shrank, tribute slowed, temples struggled to maintain rituals, rulers lost authority, people withdrew trust, and a civilization that once moved with economic harmony began to fracture into isolated pockets, each trying to survive with whatever remained. But even in collapse, the Maya money engine left traces. When archaeologists clear soil from abandoned temples, they find storage pits filled with hardened remnants of cacao pods. They find salt briquettes stacked like ingots. They find jade offerings where they shouldn't be, evidence of hurried relocations. They find scratched murals showing merchants carrying sealed bags, their roles more important than most histories ever admitted. They find thin walls where codices once rested. Only the impressions remain, the ink long gone, the pages burned centuries ago. These fragments do not tell a story of failure. They tell a story of engineering, of precision, of a financial world that once ran on trust, geography, and knowledge, until the fragile balance of all three was broken. The engine didn't disappear, it simply decayed layer by layer. And beneath modern forests and ruins, the pieces sleep, waiting to be read again. And yet, even as the engine fractured, even as cities emptied and markets thinned, a final chapter played out quietly, one that almost no one ever speaks about. Because long after the towering temples cracked, long after the great plazas filled with vines, long after the last royal scribes closed their ink pots, the Maya money system kept breathing in the shadows. Traveled deeper into the forest, not toward the grand cities, but toward the small, hidden settlements that were never carved in stone. Here, far from royal demands and political turmoil, families continued to cultivate cacao with a level of precision that mirrored the ancient specialists. They tended their groves at dawn, shaded the fragile pods with woven palm mats, wrapped young trees in protective layers to save them from heat. These communities didn't grow cacao for tribute or commerce or elite ceremonies. They grew it because it was their inheritance, an economic knowledge passed down through whispers rather than records. The great economic engine of the Maya collapsed at the top, not the bottom. In these small villages, people still traded cacao for woven cloth, fish, maize, salt, obsidian blades. They still stored beans in clay vessels sealed with resin. They still inspected each bean for cracks, mold, or insects. They still roasted them lightly before storage to prevent decay. They still recognized cacao as a measure of value, not because a ruler declared it, but because the system had been part of their life for generations. This was the quiet survival of a forbidden economic technology, hidden from conquerors, hidden from rival kingdoms, hidden from historians for centuries. And this survival raises a question historians have been reluctant to ask. If the Maya money engine was truly erased, how did so much of its structure remain in oral memory? Why do remote communities still practice techniques identical to those used in the peak of Maya civilization? Why do the same measurements, the same drying methods, the same storage rituals appear across regions separated by hundreds of kilometers? Because the engine was never a royal creation. It was a cultural machinery built from below. Kings managed tribute, priests managed records, merchants managed routes. But the knowledge, the true knowledge, belonged to the people. It traveled through families, not temples, through fields, not palaces, through hands, not decrees. And knowledge carried through hands cannot be erased. This is what makes the Maya economic system different from every other ancient financial engine. Mesopotamian tablet banking vanished when scribes disappeared. Egyptian grain accounting collapsed when their bureaucracy fell. Roman coinage lost stability when their empire fractured. But the Maya system outlived royalty, politics, temples, and cities because its currency didn't rely on any of them. Value wasn't stamped. Value wasn't stored in vaults. Value wasn't controlled by power. Value grew from trees, and trees only obey nature. Follow the trail of these communities today and you'll find another secret. Archaeologists mapping ancient settlements often discover surprising clusters of cacao trees growing in places where today farmers swear they did not plant them. The soil patterns reveal the truth. These groves are survivors, descendants of cultivation zones abandoned centuries ago. Their roots stretch into layers of ash, pottery fragments, broken storage vessels, footprints of ancient terraces, living currency growing from the bones of forgotten financial districts. Imagine standing among these trees at dusk. Fireflies flicker. The air carries the scent of earth and leaves. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the faint sound of grinding, someone preparing cacao the same way their ancestors did. In that moment, you're not standing in a ruin. You're standing inside the ghost of an economic engine that once powered an entire civilization. And if you listen closely, another truth emerges. The Maya didn't build one money system, they built two. The first was visible: markets, merchants, trade routes, tribute chambers. The second was invisible: family knowledge, agricultural mastery, unrecorded exchange networks, and oral financial memory. The first collapsed, the second survived. And because the second survived, the first can be reconstructed. That is why archaeologists can piece together trade routes from broken pots found hundreds of kilometers apart. Why economists can identify cacao shortages through pollen studies. Why we can map ancient tribute zones by analyzing storage residues. Why inscriptions depicting economic cycles can be matched with soil layers showing periods of drought. Because the engine left fingerprints, thousands of them, hidden in landscapes, not documents. In the end, the Maya financial system didn't vanish. It hid beneath vines, beneath soil, beneath stories, beneath generations who kept the knowledge alive without even realizing they were holding the keys to a forgotten machine. This is the kind of history that was never taught, not because it was unimportant, but because it didn't fit the narrative of empires built on metal, stone, or military power. A civilization powered by plants? A currency sustained by farmers instead of kings? A financial engine protected by secrecy, geography, and fragile seeds? It challenges everything the old world believed about wealth. But the ruins tell the truth. The trees tell the truth. The artifacts tell the truth. And somewhere deep in the rainforest, in a quiet village where the nights are warm and the groves run deep, a family still counts their beans under a dim firelight, weighing them with the same careful fingers their ancestors used 1,000 years ago. The Maya money engine never died. It simply chose new guardians. And as long as those trees continue to grow, the memory of the world's most delicate, most intricate, most astonishing forgotten financial machine will never fully disappear. If this hidden chapter of ancient finance opened a door to a world you were never meant to see, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more lost economic systems, explore the other forbidden files linked below, and follow the social links in the description for deeper stories buried beneath time.